So here's some tips and things you can think about when doing Photoshop activity number 3, the antique or vintage or whatever you want to call it. The goal behind this is to take a modern picture and make it look as if it were taken in the era of, say, the Civil War, or the 1850s or 1880s, or even the early 1900s up through even the 20s and 30s, when photography was largely black and white and oftentimes not a very perfect science. When you look at pictures from that era, this is a Civil War era picture of a train, you can see how the picture has this tannish hue to it. You can see how there's problems with it, with discolorations where it's lighter in different spots. This picture here of President Lincoln, these dots and things all over the picture aren't on their pants. This is what they call visual noise. If you look close at these, you'll see the grain of the picture comes through, the little dots that actually make up the image, kind of like the pixels do in our modern era. Sometimes there's scratches and things as well in these older pictures. Plus the focus isn't always perfect all the way through. Stuff out toward the corners and the edges here oftentimes a little bit blurrier, not a focus. You'll notice the same thing on that train picture, like some out of focus up in the corners and things like that. So how do we do that on Pixlr photo editor? Well, the first thing you'll do to make this project authentic is find a picture that will work. You wouldn't want to open up a picture of a jet fighter or a Lamborghini and turn those into a vintage photo, although it might be kind of neat. We want to strive for plausible realism here. So I'm just going to take this landscape photo of this mesa out in wherever, Utah or something, the desert Southwest. The first thing you're going to do is we need to get rid of the color and add that sort of what they call a sepia tone, that tannish hue to the picture. So in Pixlr and in Photoshop too, this is an adjustment we can make. When we go hue, saturation, the first thing we need to select is right here, this little checkbox says colorize. You want to choose that. Now that's not our sepia tone, our brownish hue yet, but now we take that hue slider and go down this way. Somewhere between the red and yellow area will give you sort of that tan look. Probably something like that. We may even adjust the lightness, lighten it up a little bit, maybe a little less saturation as well of the color. Not so much that it goes completely gray, but something in this range. And you can play with these sliders on your own to get it the way you think it looks best. Then you're going to hit OK. The next thing we can do is add in that visual noise like we talked about, that grain of the photo. Those, maybe we'll even get some dots and things. Well, we can do that by going to the filter menu. In filter we can go to noise, and we want to make sure that we check this box here so that monochromatic is selected. Make sure that's checked. And then you can add as much noise, that's obviously too much, or as little as you need. Add enough to make it authentic, give it kind of that rough, kind of grainy look. This is maybe a little bit too much, but I like it, so I'm going to hit OK. This would be passable. This is done, but there are other things we could do too. We could go to this filter menu and experiment with some different types of blurs. A lot of times if we were to do this in Photoshop, we'd use what they call a lens blur. So I could maybe just try the blur here. It adds a little bit of blur to the picture. There's also the blur tool, where we could take some of these things, maybe do some smudging, just to make some things slightly out of focus, especially down in the corners, without making it look bad. I'm going to get rid of a couple of those. So those are just some other options that you could mess around with. Now that I've told you that, you would save that as a JPEG and what have you. I want to show you a shortcut. You happen to have the Pixlr editor, right? And they actually have in here, when you go to adjustment, there it is, there is an old photo setting that kind of does all that for you, although it's not perfect. You can see in this one here, there's still a lot of color to it. It does give it sort of a vintage effect right away. If I were to try that with that Mesa photo that we used before and go to old photo, it's better, but it's not perfect. I kind of like my version of it. This looks a little bit more authentic. So yes, you could use that adjustment that's there, but it really isn't as good as going in, adjusting your hue and saturation, doing the colorization like we talked about, adding in some noise, and then maybe taking some of these other tools and lightening up a few areas or things like that.